Hello, it's Scott Manley here, coming to you from the luxury of my minivan. That's because I've been working hard on the house all this weekend and haven't had any time to actually record any videos. So, this is a video of SpaceX updates. I don't want to become the SpaceX channel, but you guys seem to like the SpaceX news. There are many other rocket companies out there, but none of them seem to be quite as newsworthy right now as SpaceX, and specifically Elon Musk and his fondness for sharing all sorts of fascinating details on Twitter. So I think the big news is that in the last week, Starship Hopper finally got assembled, all the parts got put together, and we got to see the full glorious vision of the future, or potential comedy prop, depending upon which side of the debate you land on. It still looks pretty crinkly. I think they're going to take it apart because I've seen pictures showing things that look like domes in there, and my theory, the general theory, is that these are bulkheads for the fuel tanks, and they will take it apart, put the bulkheads in, and then they'll be able to fill it with fuel. Elon Musk has also confirmed that those rocket engines that we see attached to it are actually real Raptor engines that have been tested, but they are not the current version of Raptor engines. So there's improvements to Raptor. They've had significant redesigns apparently. And he said specifically that the 3 engines on there are still being built in, or that are going to be on there, are still being built in California, and they will be tested probably in a couple of months before they're put on there. So Elon has put a timeline of about 2 months before we start seeing anything related to tests of this. I'm going to say 12 to 16 weeks, and that does mean the April Fools is right in there. So still potentially an April 1st joke. Because of this, because of all the debates, because of the people that think that it looks like junk, I did actually do a Twitter poll. I was like, hey, what do you guys think? Do you think this is never intended to fly? Do you think this is a joke? Second option was, you think this might be intended to fly, but its shoddy construction will mean that it will never actually get off the ground, or won't get far off the ground. Third option will be that it actually flies to its test altitude, but at some point has a spectacular RUD, which means they have to go to another test. Or the fourth one is that it is a glorious vision of our shiny SpaceX Starship future. And it turns out, a lot of you guys think that it's going to be a glorious vision of the future. The results were like 15% thought it was totally fake, never intended to fly. 15% thought that it will never get off the ground because of technical reasons. 30% think that it's going to fly and then RUD, but a full 40% of you want that bold, glorious vision of the future. And it would be pretty cool if that happened. Anyway, other huge SpaceX news that happened on Friday is layoffs. About 10% of the company was reputedly laid off. They were invited to a general meeting. The situation was explained. Everybody went home and waited for emails. And well, I can see why some people would think this is a bad thing. There was also, they did actually look for funding earlier, and they only got about 270 million out of the 500 million. So there are some analysts that are saying, oh, SpaceX is doomed, and I think those guys are totally wrong. Largely on account of the fact that, SpaceX has been quite successful at recovering boosters, and they've been developing a lot of new projects. Now a lot of those development projects are ending, and the need for new rockets has been vastly reduced. So I think that there's lots of room for them to trim. And Elon Musk, he's a Silicon Valley guy, and it's not uncommon to see companies that are successful, that have finally found their calling, finally pivoted to what they need, to actually get rid of staff that they don't think is relevant to their current process. And I've seen this happen at very successful companies. It's also possible that Elon Musk is doing this to try and show investors that he's a serious guy. But of course, this isn't, you got to remember, SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell, she is the person in charge of SpaceX, of all the important stuff. Elon, her hardest job is keeping Elon under control, specifically when he says some crazy things on Twitter. So I don't see this being particularly portentous for SpaceX or anything. I think that they're going to continue. At the worst, what happens is they stop BFR, or they slow BFR, and they just sit living off the profits they get from being the Falcon 9 launch company and reflying their rockets. I think they have such a head start, and they have such room on their price margins that they can happily do this. Anyway, another thing that came out in the last week was that they released some videos showing a full test of the fairing recovery, where they drop the fairing from a helicopter. We see the fairing fall, deploy a power wing, and there's a ship on the ocean with the giant net, and it steers in, and it gets so close, but it doesn't catch them. And I did say, maybe it's time for you to guys start testing with helicopters. And of course, I realized, that's ridiculous. They're going to need two ships for sure, but then if they need helicopters, they would have to have a ship with two helicopters, and then you're operating helicopters far from shore, which means a big, more complicated ship. I think the ship they've got that has the net, actually, it probably is the cheapest way for them to do this. $5 million each for those fairings, or maybe it's $2.5 million. I guess I'm going to have to check that. But, SpaceX going for recovery and reuse, and then, maybe they can lay off the staff that work on that. Yeah. It would be cool to see it happen. It would also be cool if I could simulate it in Kerbal Space Program without having to attach a Kerbal to get the power wing running. Anyway, yes. That investment. So the investment money they were looking for earlier in the year. Or last year, they got $500 million. And my theory on this is that they were really looking for money for BFR. And that's why the investors weren't that interested. Basically, the terms of the deal probably wasn't that interesting to investors based on the equity they would have got and all that. And maybe they just didn't think that their money was going to be used particularly well. They thought there were better investments elsewhere. And so building up Starship Hopper with the shiny silver vision of the future looking like 1960s space art could well be a play to try and convince some investors that SpaceX can still do things very, very quickly. Building a rocket in a field and then flying that would be a world's first. It would be pretty impressive. It might convince some people to invest their money in this, this project. So that's what I'm thinking. It certainly doesn't need the silver surface for its current flight profile. FCC documents confirm this is going up. The highest it's going to go is under 5,000 meters, under 15,000 feet. It's not going to space. It's not even going to a place where the atmosphere is going to be particularly thin. Yeah, it's going to look great if it flies. It's going to look amazing if it explodes. But I think this is really the reason why it's silver is just to convince potential investors to part with their cash and support SpaceX's, and more specifically Elon Musk's, vision of the future. I mean, I can imagine somewhere that there was this Elon's like, we have to build Starship, and Gwyn's like, we can't spare you all this money. It's like, fine, I'll do it in a tent. I'm serious. I could imagine that meeting happening. And if we're talking about crazy Elon Musk plans, there was once again this idea came back on Twitter about using the cold gas thrusters from the upper part of the Falcon 9 uses reaction control thrusters powered by compressed nitrogen gas in pressure vessels. And Elon was like, we should just stick that in the back of a Tesla and make a Tesla that can fly. And if you built a big enough tank, you could probably get it off the ground for a couple of seconds and then spend a lot of time repressurizing it. Compressed nitrogen is not particularly efficient, but then again, it is just available in the air. I don't think that's happening. The Tesla is a pretty heavy car. It's not really the best car for flying, to be honest. Electric car, fine, but flying car, that's not really happening, except maybe a stupid... I think if they tried that, it would crash. There had been some discussion about, after it was revealed that the Starship would be silver, there was a number of people that said, oh, well, obviously the booster's going to be silver. I was one of those people that said, well, why would you change the main booster? The reason for the Starship being silver was to deal with re-entry heating. The booster does not need to deal with re-entry heating. It only needs to deal with hypersonic speeds. So the advantages of carbon fiber is that it's lightweight, and, why would they throw all that out the window? Well, we've been trying to get an answer out of Elon about this for a while, and he confirmed that actually, no, the plan is for the booster to be shiny as well. So I apologize to everyone that I said, there's no reason for the booster to change color, because Elon seems to have confirmed this. So anyway, while all the big news is on layoffs and the shiny Starship, SpaceX continues to be doing what it does best. It just launched the final 10 Iridium satellites out of Vandenberg on Friday morning. I actually went out my back window to try to see if I could see it, and I didn't see it, and then I looked at the video afterwards and saw a tiny fragment of the trail as it cut between the clouds. Also, CRS-16 departed the space station, bringing back thousands of kilograms of science experiments and stuff. So yeah, that continues, and yeah, I'm sure Elon will continue to tweet and reveal fascinating bits of information about his SpaceX plans, but man, I don't know. I just forever looking at Starship Hopper and saying it can't fly, but Elon says it will fly. I don't know what'll happen. I hope it flies. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.